Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is a returning guest. It's been a little while since he's been on the show. His name is Jonathan Stone. He's the executive director of Save the Bay. So I say to you, welcome back, sir.
Sean, thanks for having me here.
So anything new going on since the last time? Probably not much.
No, not much.
No. All right, well, thanks for coming in. Actually, there's been a lot that's been going on, but let's sort of go and get a background on Save the Bay, the mission and what it is actually.
Sure. Save the Bay is a grassroots environmental organization. We're one of the older ones in the United States. We were founded in 1970 by a group of citizens in Tiverton, Rhode Island, as a matter of fact. And our mission is to protect and improve Narragansett Bay and the surrounding waters, Rhode Island's coastline and the watershed of Narragansett Bay.
Now, the name like Save the Bay, when this all came together for the first time, someone felt that there was a need and a necessity for this. How did it come about?
So I appreciate the question because it's really an example of folks in a small town, Tiverton, getting together to fight a proposal to build an oil refinery.
Wow.
And it would have been a massive facility. It would have been about 700 acres in Tiverton. And ultimately, a member of this small group sat around a kitchen table one Sunday morning and looked at each other and said, well, what do we call ourselves? And there was one gentleman in the group who happened to be a PR executive in Fall River. And he said, well, let's call us what we are. Let's call it Save the Bay. And that stuck, and that's really defined our mission ever since. So we're, in a sense, we're very fortunate because the name of the organization really tells the story about what we do in life.
That's a perfect name. I mean, it really is. Now, was everybody at that table, were they really opposed to this big oil refinery coming in?
They were. And of course, with that success, the organization recognized it had grown during the process of fighting that particular proposal and recognized that there were a lot of other important issues and problems with Narragansett Bay that needed to be solved, such as water pollution. That was, of course, the biggest one. And that's been our primary focus for the last 40 years, is cleaning up water quality and improving the environmental health of Narragansett Bay.
So that entails actually getting out in the community, talking to people. Does it include lobbying, legislators,
Sure,
raising money, but actually being on the ground where the waterways are, so to speak, too?
That's right. We have two employees, two members of our team at Save the Bay, whose principal role is to be on the water and to be our eyes and ears. They're both trained scientists. They both do water quality monitoring work. One lives in the Westerly area and works on Little Narragansett Bay. The other lives in North Kingstown, Rhode Island, and is really responsible for the bay itself. So they're both bay keepers, and they have the resources, the boats, the support to do the water quality monitoring work and to be sort of the eyes and ears of the organization on the bay.
So where do we stand now when you're talking about the waterways, the bay itself?
Yep.
Where do we stand as far as quality, as far as health-wise?
Well, we have a lot to be proud of in Rhode Island and Massachusetts over the cleanup in Narragansett Bay. It's one of the shining examples of a collective effort over 30 years, 35 years, to improve water quality. And as a result, we've seen a result of investment and effort and attention. We've seen a pretty dramatic improvement in water quality around Narragansett Bay. And that's measured in a couple of different ways. One way is how many days of the year are beaches closed because of risks to human health. We've seen over time, particularly in the last 8 or 9 years, a pronounced decline in the number of beach closure days. So that's one good measure. Another measure is how healthy the water is. Sort of, I put it this way, think about a swimming pool. The water's clear, it's safe to swim in, but it's not alive. There's no fish, there's no clams, there's no lobsters.
Something's wrong there.
Something's wrong. It's empty. And a healthy Narragansett Bay is filled with aquatic life. So we look carefully and measure indicators of that health, of that aquatic life.
The fact that it's improving greatly means at one point things were not well with it.
Right.
Was that the case?
That's correct. And it was much of it related to, or most of the problems relate to
industry?
human impact, both combination of industry, manufacturing for a long time. Rhode Island was a very manufacturing-intensive economy for 150 years. In this day and age, much of the manufacturing base in this part of the world has moved elsewhere. So the primary impacts relate to just normal human activities, human waste, which is a huge problem, but also other activities. Suburban sprawl brings with it a lot of roads, a lot of oil and gas dripping off cars, a lot of lawn fertilizer that drains into the bay that can pollute the water and cloud the water. So those kind of human impacts that are from urban and suburban development are the ones that really are the most pressing issues today.
You know, when you mentioned that, it made me think of recently, was it Mississippi? Or no, was it where it turned red? And
Yeah.
What was that situation?
Well, there's a phenomenon that's triggered when you have too much of nutrients, and the nutrient that we care most about in bays like Narragansett Bay is nitrogen. Nitrogen is a fertilizer, and when you have too much nitrogen in the water, you get a lot of plant growth. In the case of a saltwater estuary, you get plankton. And what you're talking about, that red tide, is a form of plankton. So when you have too much of a good thing, you get too much growth, and as that plankton decays and dies off, it robs the water of oxygen, and that makes it uninhabitable for fish, clams, shellfish, lobsters, the rest.
Wasn't there also a massive spill somewhere too, which caused the river to completely change color or something?
Well, yeah, there was. Actually, you're right.
Yeah.
That was another kind of spill, but that was in
Yeah.
Colorado recently.
Right.
Yeah.
See, these things are ugly, and they're
Yeah.
happy. You know, one thing I wanted to mention when we talked about the genesis of this organization when they fought the oil refinery. Save the Bay is not anti-industry, not anti-development,
Not at
right?
all.
You actually work hand in hand. It's just you know, your side. You're trying to keep you know, the environment the way it is.
Well, let me give you an example of that because it's a good point. There is a company that proposed and has proposed and is constructing an offshore wind farm in state waters, in Rhode Island waters. We were very involved at a state level in Rhode Island in helping identify those areas where a wind farm might be built that would minimize the impact of the project, both the final structures and the construction phase, minimize the impact on marine resources, bird life, and on public uses, sailing, fishing, boating, shipping. So we spent a good part of a couple of years supporting a state-led effort in Rhode Island to identify areas where those impacts could be minimized. As a result of that, when the name of the company is Deepwater Wind, when they submitted a proposal for permits to build the wind farm, they knew where they should locate the wind farm to minimize those impacts. And as a result, it allowed us to be supportive. We wanted to be sure that the impacts be minimized. And we're quite confident that they have been by virtue of the site selected by the company. And I think everybody on the environmental community and in industry appreciate sort of the collaborative effort to address in advance those impacts and minimize them.
So instead of having an environmental organization such as yours be opposed to it, you're on board with them because all the stuff that was done ahead of time in preparation of it.
That's right. And of course, as you know, we recognize as an environmental organization how important it is to expand our renewable energy resources. And wind is one of the many forms of energy we can generate with minimal environmental impact.
You take that over an oil refinery for sure, wouldn't you?
Well, we would. And you know, fossil fuels come with them many, many environmental problems. It's not to say that wind farms don't have some issues. All forms of energy generation do. But we think that it's critically important that Save the Bay support investments in renewable energy as long as those investments or those projects are properly sited.
Yeah. You know, somebody mentioned one time to me, talking about like hybrid vehicles, the batteries in them. Don't ever call them green, they said,
Right.
because of the amount of time it actually would take that to recycle and go back to the earth, so to speak. You got to be careful with your verbiage, right?
Well, I think that's true. I think that's true. And again, it's important to remind people that every form of energy, and we use a lot of energy in this country, has trade-offs. And we want to be sure that we minimize those trade-offs and that we encourage renewable energy.
Aren't they? Didn't they approve a wind farm out in Block Island?
Right. That has
Okay.
been approved, and it's under construction right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So that's coming.
yeah.
That seemed like a really good place out there to have a wind farm, I would imagine.
Well, I'd say it is for the wind resource. There's
Okay.
lots of wind. It's a fabulous place in terms of the amount of wind, and it is not necessarily popular with everyone. But
Property owners?
well,
Yeah.
you know, I think it's a mixed bag. You know, certainly on the island of Block Island, which where where the wind farm will be visible, there has been a real mix of opinion about the wind farm, and you know, we certainly appreciate that and respect that. We really pay attention, a lot of attention, to the impact on the marine resources, and that's where we gave our attention.
There's a big sanctuary out there too. Is it bird
Yep,
sanctuary?
yep, yep. There's a lot of preserved open space on Block Island and a lot of bird life. And it's one of the great fishing areas in this part of the world. So we were very cognizant of that and very aware how important it is to protect marine life, the fishery, and bird life to minimize the impacts on those animals from the wind farm.
When you're doing your work, when you're talking about the bay and waterways don't necessarily observe borders the way that we do. So obviously you have to work closely with your surrounding neighbors, your states. Connecticut, you mentioned Massachusetts. So talk about that a little bit.
So one of the really difficult aspects of improving water quality comes about when you're talking about multiple jurisdictions. And Narragansett Bay, for example, is a large body of water, and the land area that drains into Narragansett Bay is enormous. It's almost twice the size of Rhode Island. Half of that landmass is in Massachusetts, and the communities in Massachusetts that are in the Narragansett Bay watershed may not feel as connected to the recreational values of the bay that people who live along the coastline do. So that presents a challenge because you're asking communities in Massachusetts that are far removed from Narragansett Bay to make investments to improve water quality. But we work very hard across state lines, and we also work hard with federal agencies who are charged with enforcing the Clean Water Act to support communities in their efforts to clean up water. And that really often begins with creating awareness of a problem and appreciation for what people can do about the problem.
Good time to take a break. I want you to give out the website for Save the Bay, and people can go and learn more, and then we'll get back to it because we do have a lot to get to.
Sure. The website is www.savebay.org, and there's a lot of great information there about how to get involved.
All right. We'll take a short break and come back. Jonathan Stone's the Executive Director of Save the Bay. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. Jonathan Stone is the Executive Director of Save the Bay. He was on with us about a year and a half ago. Tell me about the day-to-day duties of the Executive Director of this organization. Are you in the office more? Are you on the road more? Are you writing grants? Are you with the legislators? Sure. What's going on?
Well, we have a very talented team of professionals at Save the Bay, and they all have their respective responsibilities. I do not need to manage them hard. They really know what they're doing. And I do then, therefore, spend a lot of my time outside of the organization working with policymakers on public policy issues, such as legislation, such as funding of state agencies, improving the performance of our state agencies, working on public education initiatives around Rhode Island and Connecticut and Massachusetts. And I also work with our donors. We are funded by private citizens, and we get very, very little money. We get no money from the state of Rhode Island, and we get very little money from the federal government. So our support really comes from members of the community. Some of those are foundations, some are individual donors.
How about corporate sponsorships? Do you have any of those?
We definitely have corporate sponsorships, and our corporate partners are incredibly helpful. Many of our corporations support two aspects of our work. One aspect is our volunteer program. We manage a huge volunteer program at Save the Bay where we have more than 2,000 volunteers every year doing things like cleaning up beaches, working on restoration projects, coastal marshland restoration projects, volunteering at our aquarium in Newport. So the volunteer program is something that many companies choose to support, and many of the employees at those companies participate in those volunteer programs. And our corporate partners also support events that we hold each year. Before we sat down, we talked about the Save the Bay Swim. That's a tremendous event, and we enjoy corporate support for that. In December each year, we have the Artists for the Bay show, which are local artists who have produced works of art that have a connection to the bay, the ocean, and we have corporate partners that support that event. Those are a couple of examples.
Are the legislators sympathetic to your cause, even if they feel like their hands might be tied as far as funding, making it available to you?
Yeah, you know, in Rhode Island, it's very true in Rhode Island, a little less so in Massachusetts. It's very true in Rhode Island that everybody in the elected office appreciates the importance and the role of Narragansett Bay and really the identity of the state. It's such an important driver for why people live and work in Rhode Island. So there's no controversy about that. The public policy questions, though, are difficult, and members of our General Assembly, members of our state government, are faced with trade-offs around resources, how to spend resources given the many, many needs and pressures. And our role is to advocate forcefully for investments in environmental pollution control in the environment, investments in the environment. If we aren't there as the voice of the Bay, it won't get heard,
Right.
and it'll be drowned out by other interests.
The other side, they have to balance. They have industry on the other side wanting to develop and wanting to spend money in that area too.
Well, that's true, and it's not. It's one of the oldest fallacies in the world. I think we probably talked about this, Sean. That you can have a clean environment or a good business environment. That's just not the case.
Right.
And in Rhode Island, we have a fabulous natural resource in Narragansett Bay.
Businesses are getting greener and greener every
And
day.
businesses are, and people in the business community care, are environmentalists too. They care a lot about pollution, about water quality. So it's not an either or. You can really have people pull together, come together. Doesn't always work out that way, but we work hard to find partners in the private sector and the business community who recognize the importance of our work.
I want to talk about where things are standing right now after, environmental issues that occurred. Let's talk about this real brutal winter we just had.
Yeah.
Did that affect anything as far as your work goes?
Well, we had an interesting...
It was an ice age, by the way.
It was. Yeah, I lived through it, as you did you.
Yeah.
And one topic that came up is quite interesting. We had a lot of snow in the streets of Providence, and of course around Narragansett Bay and Fall River and elsewhere.
Boston was brutal.
Boston
huh?
was brutal,
Yeah.
and the same issue came up that I'm about to raise came up in Boston. There was a sort of a question. Well, why don't you just dump all that snow in the bay?
That's a great question.
And the
Yeah.
reason you don't want to do that is that in the snow is a lot of trash, is a lot of oil and grease from automobiles, a lot of animal poop, dog poop and so forth.
My
so
director won't pick it up, but go on.
there's a lot that you want to be concerned about before you just willy-nilly dump the snow into the bay. And there are rules around how to best manage that and let the snow melt and not have that pollution effect.
Thank goodness that people have common sense and won't allow that all to get dumped in the bay, because that just makes your work that much more difficult, I would imagine. Right?
Well, it does, and it's I think people understand, certainly in state government, they understand how important it is that we be aware of that particular issue.
Let's go back a little bit further. You mentioned that you had volunteers that are doing things like help cleaning up beaches and stuff like that. Sandy has been come and gone for a while now, but there are still places, like for example, closer to where I live, Musquamaga Beach, that they are still doing some rebuilding after Sandy.
Right. Well, it's one of the initiatives we have undertaken after Hurricane Sandy is a series of projects that are designed to improve the resilience of our natural coastal resources. And an example of that would be salt marshes, which are really nurseries for fish and birds. And we're working on a project in Ninigret Pond, for example, that's designed to enhance the ability of that wetland, of that marsh, to withstand storm surges and to withstand and thrive in a condition of rising sea levels. So that's an example of the kind of post-Sandy restoration work we think is important and that we're actively undertaking.
Your director of communications wanted to make sure we talked about some, fishing and swimming areas of interest that people might be interested in.
Well, one of the challenges we have in Narragansett Bay, despite the great progress we've made in cleaning up the bay, is that there are areas of the bay where where water quality is poor, and where you're not allowed to fish, or you're not allowed to swim, or you're not allowed to eat the shellfish. And we're keenly focused on cleaning up those areas. For example, Greenwich Bay in Warwick in East Greenwich is an area with some still serious water quality problems. In the northern part of Narragansett Bay, Mount Hope Bay near Fall River and the Taunton River has serious environmental challenges, and the Providence area also has real problems with water quality. So we're really focusing our cleanup efforts on those areas so that you can swim and fish in every inch of the bay. There's nothing in federal law that says we want a swimmable, fishable bay except for these areas. Yeah. It covers the whole resource.
Unfortunately, the catchphrase or buzzwords these days, climate change, has gotten politicized.
Sure, yeah.
But is it a real thing, and are you affected by it at all?
Well, the health of Narragansett Bay is changing and is affected by climate change in very subtle ways over a long period of time. But the evidence is clear that changing climate conditions are dramatically affecting the bay. And I'll give you an example. There's been a major decline in the lobster population in southern New England from Cape Cod to Long Island Sound. And the latest research indicates or suggests that rising water temperatures, warming waters, are contributing to this decline in the lobster fishery. And that's really terrible news for the lobstermen, and is sort of a profound impact on a very important species. And we're seeing changes and shifts in the animals, this fish, the crabs that live in Narragansett Bay because of these changing climate conditions. Another example, and this really affects the general public, is sea levels are rising, and they're rising at a rapid rate.
Is that the icebergs melting, or?
Well, it is warmer water. Warmer water expands. Icebergs are melting. That's part of it. Wind patterns are changing, and that affects sea level as well. And that's being borne out by increasing, sort of the increasingly common occurrence of flooding, coastal flooding. And I'm not talking about Hurricane Sandy. I'm just talking about high tides are getting higher. And that's affecting places you mentioned. Misquamicut is affecting Misquamicut, Matunic, Newport, up and down the coast. There are real issues associated with rising sea levels. That's something that we are really focused on helping the state plan appropriately for these new conditions.
And there's an El Nino this year they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing how things interconnect. Who would have thought that what you do also it connects with meteorology? You know, I mean, you could connect it in so many different ways. The whole world is connected like that, and things we do affect so many other things, you know?
Well, it's true, and it's, a bay like Narragansett Bay, an estuary like Narragansett Bay is an incredibly complex system.
And fragile.
And very fragile, very sensitive to small changes in temperature and rainfall and nutrients and other variables. So that's what makes it so difficult to predict exactly how the future will unfold for Narragansett Bay. But clearly, rapid climate change is going to place new forms of stress on the health of the bay.
What is your goal? Do you have goals? What's like the thing you're hoping for the most as we're more than halfway through 2015? What's next?
Well, we are, one big problem we have in Narragansett Bay is polluted runoff off the landscape, particularly in cities and towns. And we're very interested in exploring ways that where we can attract private investment in capturing runoff, polluted runoff, and treating that water. Think about big strip malls and parking lots where you do have a pollution problem that stems from the runoff. So we know that money is always a problem, and we're working with state government and the private sector to identify ways of bringing more resources to address that particular problem. That's something this year we hope to make progress on. Lots of other things. Our educational program is growing. We have ambitious goals to expand that program in the Mount Hope Bay area, Fall River, Swansea, Taunton, to help connect people in those communities to Narragansett Bay.
But you're hopeful for the future, right? And you sound passionate about it, so
Well, you
only
won't-
good things. Yeah.
You won't meet anyone at Save the Bay who isn't passionate
Yeah.
about the work of the organization. And I am hopeful. We've had a real, an incredible record of progress and success in our work. And that's because we're very focused on it. We take the long view. We are not, we're very patient. We recognize that progress can come slowly, but we're all about progress. We are really pushing hard to make sure we achieve real results.
Your job change in the winter as opposed to the summer?
For me, my job does not so much.
The people out on
We do
on
a
the
lot
ground.
of field work on the ground. Restoration work really occurs in the summer. Our school programs are in the spring and fall, and in the summer we run summer camps. We run a really neat little aquarium in Newport, which I encourage your viewers to visit. It's a fabulous little facility and great for kids. If you've got a rainy day this winter, take them down to Newport First Beach and you'll have a great experience.
Sound good. I'm sure all the information is on the website,
is,
right?
yep.
Including that event coming up in December?
Right, yes.
Okay, what's the website again?
www.savebay.org.
Jonathan Stone, the Executive Director of Save the Bay. Pleasure having you on the show. Please don't be a stranger. Come back soon, all right?
Thanks very much, Sean. I appreciate it.
You can see this show and many others on our YouTube sites. Till next time, I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Take care.